Okay, so today this is episode 3. So I really feel like we've got a bulk of content here. I mean, we've done so much so far in so little time. So episode 3 of what we're calling the Belltower, and Dr. Eric Moore is speaking to us today. He's a fellow alumni of Taylor University, and he's going to be talking about designing for diversity, which I'm very excited about as a person who I do consulting work and corporate training and that type of thing. And I think that it's been a miss for me in a lot of areas. And just the simple awareness is important, but I think actual help is on the way in terms of what we're going to hear today. So, Eric, I'm going to ask you a couple questions to get going. Let me do something real quick here. There we go. Okay. All right. So when were you at Taylor?
I was there from 2002 to 2006.
Okay. And then after Taylor, tell us like what your education was after that.
Well, so I went to Taylor for secondary English education, and so I was a teacher in Kokomo for 1 year, and I hated it. And so I quickly found my way from Indiana to Indonesia, where I taught in an international baccalaureate school there for a few years, and then on to South Korea for 4 years. And then while I was in Korea, I had the opportunity, my school paid for me to get a master's in education, which I did from Grand Valley State University. And then UT, University of Tennessee at Knoxville, recruited me for a PhD. So I came here, as a GA, got my PhD, graduated in 2017, and have been here ever since.
And are you aware of how smart you are, or is it just the rest of us?
Well, thank you. No, yes, I feel like I'm very fortunate to have the opportunities I did. There's been a lot of people who have given me chances. I was not always a great student, it's something that I've learned to be good at. And that's actually an important part of why I do the work I do now, is because I'm trying to reach learners to allow them to achieve their potential in the way that others have done for me.
Well, that's a super intro. So why don't you just jump right in, and I'm going to go on mute and hand it over to you. And if you guys have questions, throw them in the chat, or we'll take questions at the end if we have time. So take it away, my friend.
And thank you, Jen, for hosting these. Right now it's saying that host is disabling participant sharing. Would you mind turning that on so I can share my screen? There we go. Thank you. All right, let me see if I can do this right with the presenter view and all that jazz. Okay, are you seeing my presentation? Okay, so this presentation is called Designing for Diversity, How Education Can Meet the Needs of Variable Learners. So I think that as a society, and this goes back a long, long ways, back to the 1600s with a guy named Quetelet, and I won't go into all that history, but we had this sort of obsession with average-genarianism. And in recent days and years, we've kind of seen this come out in different ways: stereotypes, labels, statistical analyses, generalizations, norms. This idea of they are all manifestations of this idea of average-genarianism, where we can take a complex group of individuals and boil them down to some sort of essential mean and say that's them. We saw this in the 2016 campaign trail where Hillary was referring to all of Trump's supporters as a basket of deplorables, and Trump was referring to people coming up from our southern border as rapists and criminals. All of this, it really sells because it takes the complexity of the human condition and it simplifies it into something that we can make into a GIF or a soundbite or a meme and spread on social media. But this has been something that has been with us for a long time, and not just in politics. If you look back to World War II, our Air Force was not the dominant force that it is today, for better or worse. We had a tendency to crash a lot. Oftentimes when pilots were not shot down, what they were saying is that they were in a situation where they were in a dogfight, or they were in a situation where they just needed to hit that switch, pull that lever, depress that pedal, and it was just out of reach. It just wasn't within range for that split second that they needed to get it to prevent crashing. So these engineers and the scientists, they come together and they said, okay, we need to rethink the cockpit because it doesn't fit our pilots. So what they did is they did a series of measurements, a lot of them: height, shoulder width, arm length, the length from your wrist to your fingertip, 140 of these measurements over 4,060 pilots, or random sampling, and a very large random sampling. And what do you think they did with all of these measures? You can toss it in the chat if you want to, or unmute yourself. What do they do with this data? They took the average, Jen says. Yeah, exactly. I think you're saying the same thing, Ben. So they took all this data and they said, what is the average typical pilot? One size fits all, you're all on the right track. So they did. And guess what? Crash, 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 crash. It was just out of reach, just out of reach. It's not working. So there's an intern at Stanford at the time, a guy who likes measurement. And he said, tell you what, so I don't want to have to do an IRB. I'm going to take the existing data and I want to just look at the 10 most important measures: height, leg length, arm length, that kind of thing. Just the 10 most important. And tell you what, I'm feeling generous. I'm going to give it a 30% range. And I want to know, so for example, if the average height is 175 centimeters, how many of the 4,060 pilots are between 122.5 and 227.5 centimeters tall? Same thing with sleeve length, same thing with leg length, whatever. Just the 10 most important measures. And he is asking how many of the 4,060 pilots are within that 30% range in all 10 of the 10 most important measures. What percentage do you think he came out with? Again, you can use the chat. Rough guesses. Jen says none. When I do this, people typically say anywhere between 0 and 50, 60%, something like that, 80%. By the law of averages, by standard deviation and so forth, we should say something like 60% would fit within that. 67%, Ben's using a sort of a statistical model. Jen is right. He found exactly 0 of 4,060 pilots were within a 30% range in just these 10 most important measures. In effect, the Air Force had just spent millions of 1940s dollars building cockpits that fit nobody. Now, what they did, so they went back to their engineers and they said, well, we've got to make a cockpit that's going to fit people who are really different, for some reason they have long torsos but short legs, or they have freakishly long arms, or they're like Tyrannosaurus arms or whatever. It's got to be able to fit all of them. And no, we cannot make a custom cockpit for each individual pilot. That's totally absurd. So what are you going to do? And the engineers say, well, it can't be done. It can't be done. And so the government told them, well, if it can't be done, we're going to take our contract elsewhere. And they said, whoa, 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 hang on. So they did go back to the drawing board, and eventually they discovered, hey, you know what? We can make adjustable seats so that we're not creating a cockpit that fits the pilot. We're creating a cockpit that the pilot can adjust to fit themselves. This was a huge revolutionary idea. And it's one of those things that once we say it, it's like, well, of course. But until it's been articulated, we don't have the schema to even see it. It was so brilliant. It feels like Chuck Norris must have gone back in time to figure this out on his own. Okay, now, at the same time, we have this gynecologist, the national director of the American Gynecological Association, really big man on campus, this guy, Dr. Robert L. Dickinson, and what an appropriate name, who took this, wanted to say, what is a normal woman's body type? This was a big thing in the 1940s. So he measured some 15,000 young women, healthy young women, and collected their measurements, and he used them to create, in a very average data form, Norma. And Norma was a big deal in the mid-1940s. So she was published eventually on Women's Home Day, and women were offered an opportunity to win a $50 war bond by sending in their measures. And the woman who had the body type closest to Norma's would win this war bond. And just like with the pilots, they found women have very, very different body types, even though they're all healthy. So the woman who finally got it, she's pretty close, but still very different from Norma, because there was nobody that looked like Norma. So there was Dickens Dickinson took this the wrong way. Instead of saying, you know what, we need to rethink the way we think about women's body types, he doubled down and said, see, women are extremely unhealthy in our nation. And he led this movement that created this body image awareness campaign, the effects of which are still with us to this day. Big problems. Now, this happens in education as well. If you think about our education systems and standardized tests and standardized procedures, look just in higher education where I work. If you think about what are some essential skills that somebody needs if they're going to graduate from college, you need to be able to write essays. If you can't write essays well, you will not make it very far in college. You have to be able to fill in bubbles and take multiple choice tests well without test anxiety, or you will not make it through college very well. You have to deliver PowerPoint presentations. Now, I like to think, name a career in which filling in bubbles, writing essays, and delivering PowerPoint presentations is your job description, right? Or is this what you need to be an effective citizen in the 21st century? It's bizarre that we have chosen these skills and saying these are the gatekeeping measures that if you can't do this, you do not belong in college and you will not make it to the other side. In fact, we take our students in all of their diverse backgrounds, all of their complicated situations, all of their growth and efforts and struggles, and we graduate them saying, hey, you know what, you're a 3.3. Take that to grad school. We average all of their performance into something that's easily digestible and pretty much a lie. We design and deliver learning experiences that fit nobody. Unlike the Air Force, education has been very slow to develop adjustable seats. But what if we did? What would that look like? I'm going to be talking today about something called Universal Design for Learning, or UDL for short. And I could spend my time talking about the what of UDL or the how of UDL, and those are really important. But if I get 15 minutes, I'm always going to focus on the why. Why do we need universal design for learning? I think this really goes right back to the concept of averages and how I think we believe that we have a normal range of students that covers the majority of our student population. Not only do I think that we believe in this, I think we idealize it. I think we have this sense that it would be great if all of our students fit within this range. Now, what do I mean by normal students? I mean normal in terms of how they learn, how fast they learn, how they express their learning, what motivates and sustains them through the learning process. If we were to look at these, we might see things like we want students in terms of how they learn to learn by traditional teacher lecture and note-taking, and in the upper division courses to learn by small group work, right? If you can learn that way, we're ready for you. If they learn too slow, that's a problem. But it's also a problem if they learn too fast. This often surprises people. But if you learn too fast in my class, you're going to get bored, you're going to distract yourself, you're going to distract other people. I want students whose pace of learning just so happens to match my pace of teaching, right? We want students, like we said, who can express their learning on tests and essays and presentations. We want students who are motivated by grades, and if not that they'll do the reading because I told them with the PhD after my name to do the reading. Now, we know that there are certain groups, first generation college students, oftentimes Black and brown students, who find that these things are not working for them and who are oftentimes left by the wayside because it is a systemic design issue. The problem is not that they are different. The problem is that our environment does not accommodate variability. We have made cockpits that fit nobody. We have averaged our students down and then punished them for being other than our mythologized, hypothetical average. Now, if you think about it, if all of our students clustered there, it would make my job easy. I would only have to design a learning experience in one way, in a fairly labor unintensive way, and reach all of my students. Reality, however, is that that's just not true. Our students are very, very variable. Let's look just at one dimension in terms of how they learn. If I step into a classroom of 25 students in a small lecture hall, it would not be surprising to find a student who says, look, I'm doing fine. I learned this content pretty well with lecture and note taking. It would also not surprise me to find a student who says, I'm finding this really hard to process the lecture and take notes at the same time. I need to talk about ideas before I understand them. Not surprised. Nor am I surprised to find a student who says, this is boring. I already know this stuff. I want to be doing something with it. The point is that variability is entirely predictable. While we might pretend that our students are average, we know that they are not. And we therefore are complicit in designing environments that we know are not working for some of our students. So there's sort of this implicit, unspoken feeling that the more average our students are, the better. But there are two big problems with this. One, none of our students are truly average. And two, if we're honest, I don't think we really want them to be. We might want them to be average while they're in our classroom, but we want them to be extraordinary when they graduate from our classroom. And those two just don't work together. We have to promote their variability, not squash it, if we want them to be variable when they leave us. So how can Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, help? Or back to that question, why UDL? In UDL, one of the things that we've done is we've shifted the focus from designing for the average into thinking about how can we design for the students who are on the margins up front. So if students are coming into my Biology 101 class, I want to anticipate that there's variability in their background knowledge. I might have a student who has very, very little knowledge of biology and a student who got a 3 on the AP exam and they needed a 4 to get out of my class. Right? I need to anticipate that they're both there and think about how am I designing a learning experience such that both of these students are being appropriately challenged and have the opportunity to learn and grow together. This is the challenge, the problem. And at first it seems kind of overwhelming. Like, is that even possible, Eric? And I can tell you it absolutely is. And when we design this way, it results in more challenging, more rigorous, more impressive outcomes for all of our students. This is not watering down our curriculum. This is providing flexible pathways so that all of our learners can get to remarkable outcomes. In fact, what we're trying to do is squash this idea of the bell curve altogether. Instead, we like to talk about this as a predictable variability or a spectrum of variability. And now we have neuroscience to back this up. In the last 10 years, we've learned more about the brain than we have in all of the human history before. What we've learned, among other things, about these neural networks that make up the brain is that we can cluster them together into meaningful networks that are important and distinctly activated during the learning process. One of these networks that's most in the physical core of the brain, the most primitive part of our brain, is called the affective networks, a collection of networks that deal with what motivate and sustain us through challenge, what engages us, what keeps us focused and driven and alive in the learning process. The recognition networks are towards the back half of the brain where you have memory storage, where you have sensory input, that sort of thing, where you make connections and ideas. These are called the recognition networks. And these deal with how we recognize and conceptualize information. Finally, we have the strategic networks. And the latest part of our brain to develop, this part of your brain called the prefrontal cortex, is still developing into your early 30s in many cases. And this deals with things like how we plan, perform, and express ourselves. What we know now is that the variability from person to person in these three networks is significant and it is predictable. It is both significant and it is predictable. This is empowering because now I don't have to wait for my students to come to my class and do pre-tests on them to know that that variability is going to exist. As soon as I pick up the opportunity to teach a course, I'm going to anticipate that variability and I can design to meet it. Well, what does that look like? Let's do a comparison. So let's say I step into a traditional lecture hall. where I have one means of content being represented, and that is oral lecture. I really have one means of expressing myself most of the time, which is taking notes while somebody is lecturing at me. And maybe, let's be generous, I've got a couple of ways that I might be motivated. Maybe I'm on a scholarship and I need to get that 3.0 or higher, so grades are driving me. I really want to get a good grade in here. Maybe I'm interested in the topic in this class. So this is Geology 101. I love rocks. Don't you love rocks? I thought everybody loved rocks. So I'm interested in this particular topic. Now, UDL is focused on how we're providing flexibility or choices to our students. And when you map it out this way, it allows us to mathematically calculate how many choices can the students make and how they learn. So here where we have a limited means of engagement, representation, and action expression, we can calculate it like this. When you have one option, you really don't have any options at all. But let's go ahead and count that. So there's one way that we represent content, one for expression. There's actually three for engagement. Let me show you. You could be motivated by grades, you could be motivated by content interest, or you could be motivated by both. Those are discrete options. So now we can multiply across. 1 times 1 times 3 is, of course, 3. There are 3 combinations of these options that you can make if you're in that class. You could say, I listen well to lecture, I take good notes, I'm motivated by grades. You could say, I listen well to lecture, I take good notes, and I love rocks. Or you could say, I listen well to lecture, I take good notes, I'm interested in the content, and I need a good grade. That is the sum total options for the students for which this class has been designed. So we have 3 shades of the same hypothetical student. The further away you are from that hypothetical student, the more difficult learning is going to be. No matter how hard you work, the less likely you are to learn, period. We designed a classroom that was not for you, and you just have to struggle to keep up. In other words, we designed for the average. Now let's start back over. Let's wipe the board a little bit in this classroom design, and let's use the principles of UDL. We want to provide multiple means of engagement, multiple means of action and expression, multiple means of representation. So the grades are still there. I would love a world in which we were post grades, but we're not. So they're still there, and they're still motivating for some students. Instead of hoping that you're interested in geology, I can go out of my way to design for content relevance. So this is a general education course. I'm not really going to focus on the rocks. I'm going to focus on using scientific reasoning, focus on collaboration, focus on good skill development that you can use whatever your major happens to be. I'm going to make the content relevant for you. I'm going to maybe facilitate some sort of community interaction, having professional groups where you share note-taking, have collaborative discussions, have study groups. Some people will be more motivated when they know they're doing the work, not just for them, but also for the members of their group. In representation, I might still have lectures. I'm not saying don't lecture. I'm saying don't lecture for an hour and a half at a time. So maybe I lecture a little bit. When I lecture, I have good graphic representation of my concepts, and I break it up with some ways that you can learn this content with some hands-on activity as well. In terms of representation, maybe we still have note-taking. This is a research-based practice. Maybe I go out of my way to teach my students how to do shared note-taking and Google Docs, how to rotate the note-taking, or how different people in a group can all contribute in different ways to a collaborative note-taking. Maybe I also facilitate some sort of group discussion so people can share their ideas with peers and feel that they can be much more outspoken in a group of 3 than they can in a large class with 25, 30, 150 students. Okay? Now, let's do that mathematical calculation again. When we're doing, this seems reasonable to me. I'm not asking for the world here. I'm just saying offer a couple options for each of these, but watch what happens. We could have a student who says all these non-traditional things, oh my goodness, I am learning in a way I have never learned in this type of class before. And another student might say, well, look, I'm an expert student. I listen well to lecture, I take good notes. I'm motivated by grades. They're fine. I'm not swinging too far the other way. Their needs are still met. Another student might say, well, it's actually this particular weird combination of the 2 that I really like, or that combination or that combination. And in fact, there are 147 different combinations of the options I just showed you. Let me prove it to you. So let's go back to this. You could be motivated by grades, by content relevance, by community interaction, by the first and the second, by the second and the third, by the first and the third, or by all three. There are 7 combinations just of engagement, 7 for the way I'm representing the content, and again, the 3 for the action expression. We multiply across, 7 times 7 times 3 is 147. The point here is not that I have customized the learning experience for my students. The point is that I put adjustable seats in the classroom, and I'm empowering them to customize the learning experience for themselves. And universal design for learning, we're not just trying to improve the quality of teaching geology or chemistry or literature. We're trying to teach our students how to learn. The goal of UDL is to develop expert learners who know how they learn, who are resourceful and strategic, motivated and goal-directed, who are knowledgeable, who love learning and want to do more. And when we develop that type of student, it's something that they can carry with them for the lifespan, and is truly transformative for who gets to learn, what they get to learn, and how they ultimately are able to contribute to and be a part of a dynamic, divergent society. Thank you.
So fantastic.
Thank you.
I took all kinds of notes because I'm a good note taker.
Good job.
Thank you. I'm also motivated by you telling me I did a good job, so thank you. I will say that immediately I have already thought of ways to apply it. But what I'd like to do in our last few minutes we have, if you're open, is take any questions that people have about the content, and then for you to tell us how we can learn more.
Absolutely.
So if anyone has any questions, go ahead and unmute, or you can put it in the chat and I'll read it.
Ben.
Yes, raising my virtual hand here.
Oh,
yeah, thanks, Eric. So how much does, I would imagine this is a big influence, but sort of how effective the implementation is. So you mentioned like hands-on learning or group note-taking. Let's say there's like a hands-on learning experience where it's poorly implemented. Maybe the directions are unclear. Students are not sure what they're supposed to be doing. So how much does sort of implementation matter in this model?
Yeah, that's a great question. So UDL, most of the focus of UDL is on the design itself. So, going into it, recognizing my learners are variable, identifying that there are environmental barriers that I can take care of with good design, and figuring out which methods or approaches or materials or whatever can provide the flexibility so that learners can overcome that. The implementation is, of course, a really important next step. UDL doesn't speak as clearly to that part, but obviously, if you're going to be effective, you need to know how to follow through. So in the UDL guidelines, which I can share with you here, so udlguidelines.cas.org, you'll see that UDL draws from a whole lot of research-based practices, like you're giving an example of hands-on or shared note-taking, that type of thing. These things are part of the resources that we draw from to practice UDL. Let me make sure I share my screen here. You can see them here. These are the UDL guidelines. Like, so for example, optimize relevance, value, and authenticity is what's relevant when I, for example, go out of my way to make geology relevant for non-geology majors. I'm speaking to this. Now, how well I do that is another thing. So when you go into this, it talks about here some ideas or some strategies. There's research, supporting each one of these checkpoints, that we know that this is effective, but it does take practice. So it's something that UDL oftentimes is not just what we do, is how we do it and with whom we're doing it. We talk about developing expert systems and expert communities where I can say, well, Ben, you and I are both working on this together. Can you come observe me and give me feedback and strategies and ideas on what I'm doing and if it's effective? It tends to be something that is implemented over time as a rollout, because we're not going to go from, I've always taught this way, to I'm a mastermind of classroom diversification overnight. It takes practice like anything else.
Sure. No, thank you so much. Could you post the link in the chat?
Sure will. Sure will.
Thank you. Thanks again.
Yeah, I was thinking too, and we're at time, so if people need to go ahead and go. And just Eric, thank you so much for sharing it and getting getting the awareness up and the conversation going. I know you mentioned before everybody was on here that you help people with this stuff. So if we want to engage with you further, what is permissible, we don't want to step our boundaries, but how can we learn more about this?
Yeah, absolutely. So on Twitter, I'm purely professional on Twitter. Facebook is my much more personal side. But if you follow me on Twitter at InnoSpire.edu, which I put in the chat there, you can kind of see what I'm up to. I facilitate an international network of people who are doing this work, and it's an open network. So anybody who's interested in joining, we have quarterly meetings. We actually have one later today. We have a digital conference that I've chaired for his first 2 years. I'm stepping down from that, but it's a great conference. It's really a community that's very generous, people who share freely and widely in that community. And you can hit me up on Facebook, et cetera, as well. I'm very much somebody who likes supporting other people in this work because it's something I'm passionate about. So please do feel free to reach out to me on Twitter, on Facebook, whatever, through the professional network. And I'll be happy to continue the dialogue.
That's great. Thank you so much. We appreciate you. It was a great way to spend my lunch time with you today and with the rest of you. I love seeing all of you. It's been a boost for me every week that we do this. We'll be back next week. I will do a better job of getting that out a little bit sooner. I'll get there. And
Thanks so much.
Yeah, you bet. And we'll see you all next week. I'll get this uploaded to our channel as quickly as I can, along with the others, and get those links out to you guys. All right?
Thanks for organizing, Jen, and thanks, Eric. That was awesome.
Yeah, thank you very much for that.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks. Bye.
Grab that link before I sign off, because the chat will go away. So if you need that link, everybody copy it and get it right now.
I'll post them in the
That would be
event as well.
right.
Yeah.
Things I've learned the hard way. The chat goes away. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Obligatory Zoom wave. See you next
Bye,
time.
everyone.
Thanks so much, Eric. Really appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Yep.
You bet. I appreciate the opportunity.
All right. Bye-bye.